Hello and good morning from the Freedom of Information and Privacy Association. I'm Patrick Farnsworth. This is your Access and Privacy online news summary for Saturday, June 20th. This week, Ottawa moves on privacy, online safety, and surveillance powers. FIPA releases new work on access rights and transparency systems. And New Brunswick's review of its access and privacy law points to familiar questions about timeliness, record keeping, voter privacy, and independent oversight. Let's dive in. We begin with a busy week for FIPA, civil liberties groups and digital rights organizations across Canada. We'll start with efforts from our friends at ICLMG, a growing coalition of 21 civil liberties organizations, privacy groups, and experts is warning that the federal government has cut short debate on Bill C-22, the Lawful Access Act. The concern is not only the substance of the bill, including expanded police access to personal information, data retention powers, and possible effects on encryption, but the process. More than 100 amendments were reportedly before committee, with only a fraction debated before the motion to end debate passed. FIPA joined signatories in calling for the government to change course. Even corporations such as Google, Apple, and Meta have spoken out about this. Some, including NordVPN, DuckDuckGo, and Signal, have threatened to leave Canada. And that was not the only civil liberties flashpoint this week. ICLMG also warned that Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, risks overbroad limits on free expression and assembly if new offenses are not applied carefully and with clear, charter-respecting guidance. The bill creates an offense for willful promotion of hatred by displaying symbols associated with listed terrorist entities, as well as symbols that closely resemble them. Legal and civil liberties advocates, including the ICLMG, have stated that the wording of the offense will now allow police to interpret the display of a symbol as in and of itself promoting hatred. And on Bill C-34, the Safe Social Media Act, ICLMG raised concerns that much-needed online safety rules must not become a backdoor for expanded terrorism or violent extremism definitions, particularly where lawful journalism, advocacy, education, or political expression could be caught by automated moderation systems. Previously, the federal government had promised that the online harms in any such legislation would adhere to what is already in the criminal code. However, a new definition of acts of terrorism and violent extremism expands the scope. Meanwhile, FIPA and its partners at VoterPrivacy.ca, including Open Media, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and Centre for Digital Rights, were joined by more than 35 organizations, experts, and civil society groups calling on federal political leaders to bring political parties under privacy law. Unlike hospitals, banks, schools, and government agencies, political parties are not subject to binding federal privacy law or independent oversight. This means they can collect highly sensitive personal information, including voters' addresses, demographics, issue preferences, and inferred political beliefs, without the same legal safeguards that apply to other institutions. The open letter points to strong public support for reform. 80% of Canadians agree federal political parties should follow the same privacy rules as businesses and public bodies. The letter also highlights support for access, correction, deletion, and independent oversight of voter data. Listeners can support that campaign by following our links in the show notes. Visit VoterPrivacy.ca and sign House of Commons petition E7237. Once again, go to voterprivacy.ca and sign the House of Commons petition E7237. Now, on top of that, FIPA released two major access to information pieces this week. First, FIPA submitted recommendations to the Treasury Board Secretariat's review of the Federal Access to Information Act. The submission calls for stronger requester rights, clearer duties to assist, meaningful public interest disclosure, better resourcing, broader coverage of government functions, and a necessary reduction in unnecessary reliance on ATIA requests by parliamentarians where other tools exist. FIPA extends its sincere gratitude to the numerous groups and individuals who generously provided valuable feedback on early versions and drafts, helping us refine this document. Many have also made their own submissions. Of particular note is the BC Civil Liberties Association, the BCCLA, whose legal expertise consistently provides important insights that strengthen our arguments for progressive law reform. Second, FIPA released Drawing Access Together, a major access assessments report by Spencer Eisen. Based on more than 3 years of research into BC's FOI systems, the report finds that most public bodies do not maintain documented standards showing how records are searched for, retrieved, or redacted. The 56 organizations reviewed include all ministries, as well as boards, agencies, commissions, tribunals, and crown corporations. To address the problem, FIPA is calling for a new understanding of FOI based on the principle of correctness, meaning the right documents are rightly served within the right time. The core message is simple. Transparency systems must themselves be transparent. FIPA will have more detailed commentaries on these in the weeks ahead. Now turning to Canadian privacy stories. Ottawa has introduced its latest private sector privacy bill, the federal government's third attempt to replace decades-old legislation. The bill would recognize privacy as a fundamental right, give stronger protection to children's data, require clearer consent and plain language explanations, and give Canadians more power to request deletion of personal information, as well as give the government a path toward addressing surveillance pricing. It would also require transparency from organizations around automated decision-making where decisions significantly affect people. A major institutional change is also proposed. Private sector privacy oversight would move from the Federal Privacy Commissioner to a new Digital Safety and Data Protection Commission of Canada. That new regulator would also oversee parts of the government's online safety framework, with powers to issue binding orders and fines of up to $25 million, or 5% of global revenue, for the most serious offenses. Those are powers the Federal Privacy Commissioner has been asking for years, but under the new legislation, responsibility for the private sector, including tech companies, would go to the new regulator. The Privacy Commissioner will only be responsible for the Privacy Act, which covers government. Privacy Commissioner Philippe Dufresne welcomed many elements of the bill, including the recognition of privacy as a fundamental right, child-centered protections, privacy impact assessments, and stronger enforcement powers, while also noting the shift of private sector responsibility to the new regulator. Staying in the new privacy bill, Ottawa's proposed rules on surveillance pricing are unlikely to take effect before 2028. Artificial Intelligence Minister Evan Solomon said the government wants to proceed carefully, distinguishing unfair use of behavioral, location, or inferred personal data from ordinary loyalty or rewards programs. At a press conference, Solomon said one of his first acts, once the bill passes, will be to direct the new online safety and privacy regulator to issue guidance on what counts as surveillance pricing. However, government officials have said they expect it will take 18 months to get the new regulatory body in place. Critics, including the federal NDP, argue that delay leaves Canadians exposed to companies using personal data to set individualized prices. Manitoba has already passed provincial legislation banning the use of consumers' personal data to increase prices based on algorithmic information. Staying on the national level, Privacy Commissioner Philippe Dufresne says sexualized deepfakes created through Elon Musk's Grok chatbot and shared on X violated Canadian privacy law. The commissioner found that XAI and X Corp launched the image generation tool without adequate safeguards and did not properly account for privacy harms. The commissioner said while the company has made some changes, they don't go far enough. One of the recommendations that the commissioner's office made was that XAI and X Corp suspend the tool until they can put the appropriate safeguards in place. They've not agreed to do this, and Dufresne can force them to do it. The commissioner launched the investigation into Grok in January. It looked at whether the companies involved are complying with privacy law and whether they obtained valid consent to collect, use, and disclose personal information to create deepfakes, including explicit content. The case underscores a long-standing problem. The commissioner can investigate and make findings, but under current law cannot issue binding orders or financial penalties. The friend says that gap creates a lack of incentive, and in some cases, a disincentive to comply with privacy rights. Meanwhile, federal opposition parties are still studying Bill C-34, the government's online harms legislation, and hearing from parents and stakeholders to determine whether it adequately protects children. The bill would require social media platforms to restrict access for children under age 16, unless they meet sufficient safeguards. It would also regulate AI chatbots and create a new digital regulator. A statement from NDP leader Avi Lewis says his party is looking at whether the bill effectively addresses the root causes of online harms, like misinformation and sexual exploitation, and is consulting with experts. The NDP and Conservatives have both said they are reviewing the bill closely, including how age verification could affect privacy and how the social media ban for kids is implemented. The NDP warned that age checks must not become another large-scale data grab by major platforms. And in local privacy stories, another great example of the expanding types of cybercrime. LGI reporter Isabel Buckmaster at Guelph Today reports that Centre Wellington's paid parking system in Elora remains offline after links from the penalty notice payment system redirected some users to unrelated commercial and adult websites. There is no estimate for when its paid parking program is anticipated to come back online. The township says parking fees, including penalty notice payments, are temporarily waived while it works with its service provider. It has also said there is no evidence that personal information, payment details, or financial data were compromised. In the latest example of municipalities enabling corporate surveillance in public spaces, LGI reporter Keith Lacey at the Penticton Herald reports that Penticton is expanding use of a remote guard camera program downtown and in other business areas. Officially called the Remote Guard Camera Program, it was initiated through the Downtown Penticton Business Improvement Association in 2021 and is now managed by the Chamber, with grant funding provided by the City of Penticton. The program currently includes 30 cameras at 22 locations, operating between 12 to 24 hours per day, with third-party monitoring at 8 locations. The Chamber of Commerce says privacy remains a top priority, that cameras are installed only in public areas, and that footage access is tightly controlled, only being provided to the RCMP for investigations when supported by a valid police file number. In the first quarter of 2026, 3 incidents of vandalism and property damage were caught on video. Another 7 involved trespassing on private property, and 3 where fires were started and extinguished. A total of 59 calls for service were made to the RCMP in the first quarter based on video evidence. Also interesting, this corporate surveillance program classified people gathering in public spaces as an incident and identified 233 incidents of loitering. The privacy question is not only whether footage is controlled, but how public surveillance programs are outsourced to corporate entities and nonprofits, who defines success, how long data is retained, and whether public safety metrics capture the broader effects of constant monitoring in public space. Now to access to information stories across Canada. We begin in New Brunswick, where the province has released a review report on the Right to Information and Protection of Privacy Act. The report finds significant opportunities to strengthen transparency, including possible expansion of the Act's scope, proactive disclosure requirements, a duty to document, narrower exceptions, and a stronger independent review model. It also identifies familiar operational problems: delays, uneven response quality, limited training, weak tools, and resource gaps, especially for smaller public bodies and local governments. The report recommends a modern online request portal, more training, a policy manual, better support for municipalities, and consideration of a hybrid review model where public bodies must follow certain ombud recommendations unless a court says otherwise. On privacy, the report calls for modern rules on artificial intelligence, automated decision systems, privacy management programs, privacy impact assessments, and voter privacy. In particular, it recommends exploring privacy requirements for political parties, with an independent body empowered to verify and enforce compliance. We'll return to that report in more detail in the weeks ahead. Meanwhile, in Ontario, LGI reporter Danielle Pittman at Aurelia Matters reports that Ramara Council declined to support a Prince Edward County motion calling for repeal or amendment of recent provincial FOI changes, which enshrine more limits on what the public can request from its leaders. Councillor Dana Tuju argued that provincial officials should remain subject to fair public scrutiny, but the motion failed after other councillors said they did not know enough about the changes. The original motion was simply to receive the correspondence from Prince Edward County. Ramara carried the original motion to receive the correspondence from Prince Edward County as information. The story is a reminder that access reform is now being debated not only in legislatures but around municipal council tables, where local governments are often both users and subjects of access laws. Some people who received Canadian citizenship certificates under Lost Canadians legislation are now being told to surrender those documents while Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada reviews their files. When Bill C-3 became law, it created new citizenship by descent rules meant to replace a Stephen Harper-era law limiting the ability to pass on Canadian citizenship to the first generation born outside of Canada. That law was deemed unconstitutional in December 2023 by an Ontario Superior Court judge. The new law says that people born or adopted outside of Canada before December 15, 2025 are automatically Canadian if they can prove they had a Canadian parent. This applies to anyone whose parent also became Canadian because of the new law, which means it could stretch back generations. Immigration lawyers say the letter raises serious process questions: why certificates were issued if evidence was insufficient, and whether submitted evidence may have been overlooked. The letter states that recipients will have an opportunity to respond with further documentary evidence supporting their citizenship claim, and if that is accepted, they will get their citizenship certificate back. The letter also says that government systems have been updated to show the recipient's citizenship is under review. One lawyer is advising affected people to file access to information requests to obtain their own immigration file notes. The broader access issue is clear. When people are left in legal limbo, they need meaningful access to the records behind government decisions that affect their status. And the Canadian press used the Access to Information Act to obtain internal RCMP reports showing that most crime guns traced by the RCMP to identifiable sources in 2023 and 2024 came from within Canada, rather than being smuggled from abroad. The figures, the latest available from the RCMP, provide new insights into the origins of firearms involved in crimes ranging from break and enter to homicide. In 2024, the RCMP's Tracing Center completed 6,951 firearm traces. Of those, 4,197 were identified as crime guns, and 2,814 had a known source. 67 of the crime gun traces in 2024 turned up privately manufactured firearms, sometimes called homemade ghost guns. The reports found that most traced long guns and a substantial number of handguns were domestically sourced. The reports point out that the analyses, which include only traces by the RCMP Center, are not representative of the total number of gun traces in Ontario and Quebec, provinces that have their own tracing agencies. The story shows the public value of access law. It can bring evidence into debates where public assumptions, enforcement priorities, and policy choices may not line up neatly. In Alberta, LGI reporter Chantel Downs at Lakeland This Week reports that Cold Lake has updated its records management and retention bylaw after Alberta replaced its former FOIP legislation with the Protection of Privacy Act and the Access to Information Act. The city's existing records bylaw, which was originally passed in November 2016, was created to guide how municipal records are retained, disclosed, and managed. The bylaw is meant to balance privacy protection, transparency, and public access to information, while treating records as an organizational resource rather than the property of individual departments or groups. City staff said the change updates references and aligns the bylaw with Alberta's new privacy management program requirements. The city says the update does not change the substance of its records process. And LGI reporter Kimberly DeJong at the Brant Beacon reports that Blandford Blenheim is preparing a public request for information, or RFI, on possible summer day camp providers. The RFI will work to gather information about what kind of camp programming could be offered to the community, the level of interest from service providers, and what potential partnerships or rental models may be available. It will request details on proposed programming, target age groups, staffing, space requirement, and potential financial arrangements for use of facilities. While the story is not primarily about FOI law, it shows access principles in practice, public procurement, public consultation, and the use of surveys to shape criteria before a municipality enters into service arrangements. Next, police in several Quebec municipalities have issued thousands of fines for allegedly insulting officers or municipal officials. Numbers released through an access to information request show Quebec City alone reported 11,092 fines between April 2020 and March 2026 under a bylaw prohibiting abusive or insulting remarks toward public officials. The release of data showing the staggering number of fines for foul language coincides with a series of high-profile cases about police misconduct in Quebec, including in Montreal, where investigators recently dismantled a patrol unit in a multicultural neighborhood over allegations of racism and what local police described as reprehensible behavior by officers. Civil liberties advocates warn that such bylaws risk discretionary enforcement and could chill expression, particularly for communities already more likely to experience over-policing. And in Calgary, lawyers for former Mayor Jyoti Gondek and former Councillor Sean Chu are opposing a police request to retain seized devices for up to a year while investigators attempt to access them. Police say the devices could contain evidence in a municipal corruption investigation. Lawyers for the former officials argue police have not shown a clear plan or timeline. Investigators allege Gondek and Chu were involved in an influence peddling scheme where council reconsidered a change in bylaw to allow for a townhome development in Calgary in exchange for campaign donations that exceeded the allowable amount. Lawyers argued police are whiling away time, waiting for software to break into their clients' phones, which are guarded by security barriers. Police say there could be crucial evidence hidden inside. None of these allegations have been tested in court, and no charges have been laid. The case sits at the intersection of privacy, device security, evidentiary access, and public accountability. It also includes an allegation that one official asked that discussions be kept to a personal phone because a work phone could be subject to freedom of information requests. That detail points to a recurring challenge. Access laws can only work when public business is conducted and retained in public systems. Now to international stories. 15 countries have adopted the Mombasa Declaration in Kenya to fight illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. The declaration calls for better access to information on fishing vessels, ownership, licensing, and enforcement data. Illegal fishing is estimated to cost the global economy up to $50 billion annually, while also affecting food security, coastal livelihoods, and marine ecosystems. The signatories said in a statement the measures are intended to curb illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, also known as IUU fishing, which threatens marine ecosystems and the livelihoods of millions of people who depend on fisheries. The declaration builds support for the Global Charter for Fisheries Transparency, a set of 10 policy principles aimed at improving governance through low-cost reforms, including modernizing vessel registries and publishing fishing authorizations. This is access to information in a global governance context. When vessel ownership, licenses, and fishing activity remain opaque, illegal actors can hide, and transparency is needed to enable enforcement tools. Next, Doctors Without Borders found a pattern of abuse and exploitation by some staff working in Chad along the Sudanese border, in some cases targeting underage girls or trading food or jobs for sex with refugees. A confidential internal report obtained by AP identified 59 allegations and said 18 staff members were dismissed and barred from future employment. In some cases, the group told AP the allegations couldn't be verified or the perpetrators identified. The report also said some of the repeated exploitation suggested potentially organized sexual trafficking. The organization said it launched the investigation in response to AP reporting that women had accused staff of sexually exploiting them in displacement sites in Chad. The report credited AP as playing a fundamental role as an external whistleblower. Doctors Without Borders said it has strengthened recruitment, reference checks, and complaint systems. The story is a difficult reminder that whistleblowing, internal records, and investigative reporting can expose failures inside institutions that exist to protect vulnerable people. Accountability depends on whether those systems are able to hear complaints and act on them. And now we shift to the United States. California Governor Gavin Newsom says the U.S. Justice Department is investigating people around him and his wife, and he is accusing the Trump administration of politically motivated law enforcement as he weighs a presidential bid. Newsom said in a video posted on X that federal agents have knocked on the doors of his friends and former employees and have asked for records. A person familiar with the matter denied the existence of an investigation specifically targeting the governor, but said there are multiple federal probes into people around him, including one related to his wife's taxes. The full details remain unclear, and Newsom has not been accused of wrongdoing in the cases described, but his office has filed a public records request seeking communications from Justice Department leaders mentioning him or his wife. The access issue is familiar. When public power is alleged to be used for political purposes, records become central to proving or disproving the claim. The Trump administration is moving oversight of special education and civil rights out of the Education Department. Civil rights enforcement in education would move to the Justice Department, while special education oversight would shift to Health and Human Services. Student privacy work would also move to Justice, and they will provide some training and advisory help to schools. The Education Department has already offloaded some of its programs through 10 earlier internal agreements. But the agencies involved in the announcement, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services and the Office for Civil Rights, were among the most closely watched. Supporters described the move as reducing federal micromanagement. Critics warn it could weaken accountability, create confusion for families, and disrupt services for students with disabilities and other underserved groups. A key U.S. surveillance program, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, also known as FISA, is set to expire after Congress failed to pass a temporary extension. Section 702 allows U.S. intelligence agencies to collect communications of foreigners outside the United States without a warrant, and because those communications can include Americans who are in contact with targets, civil liberties advocates have long pushed for stronger privacy safeguards. Concerns have also been raised over revelations that FBI analysts over the years have improperly queried the vast repository of intelligence collected through the program for information about Americans, including related to the January 6, 2021 riot at the Capitol. A court order is expected to keep collection operating for another year, so there may not be an immediate intelligence gap. Still, the lapse highlights the continuing tension between national security powers and privacy protections. Finally, Signal Ohio and AP report that Ohio has approved a new photo ID requirement for voting by mail beginning in 2027. This is a major change to a voting method that previously had been exempted from the strict voter ID requirement Republican lawmakers passed following the 2020 presidential election. Republican lawmakers unveiled the new photo ID requirement for mail voting on June 9th before swiftly approving it in the House and Senate the following day. The new law, officially called House Bill 472, is one of two voter ID measures that Republicans fast-tracked this month. The House also approved Senate Joint Resolution 10, a related measure that would amend Ohio's constitution to add Ohio's existing photo ID requirements for in-person voting. Supporters say the measure will improve confidence in elections. Critics, including election officials and voting rights groups, say it was rushed and could create barriers for seniors, people with disabilities, and others who rely on mail voting. The bill also creates an online absentee ballot portal where voters may submit facial images and photo ID. After privacy concerns were raised, lawmakers added language making submitted photos and personal information private and exempt from public records law. There were also concerns the bill's timeline was unrealistic and didn't allow for testing. That is the unintended consequence to watch. Election security measures increasingly depend on personal data systems, and privacy protections must be built in from the start. That's it for this week's Access and Privacy Online News Summary. As always, thanks for joining us and for following the stories that shape privacy, information management, access rights, and public transparency in Canada and beyond. To help us keep the mics on, subscribe through FIPA News Monitoring, share the show, or consider supporting FIPA's work. Our writer is Sean Fisk. Original music for today's show was composed by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Patrick Farnsworth, your host and producer. A big FIPA thank you to all the reporters, contributors, publishers, and listeners who make this work possible. Stay safe and stay informed.